The massive alien warship Sovereign's Wrath floated like a dark mountain in space. Inside its command center, dozens of alien officers from 7 different species gathered around a holographic display. Their faces showed everything from amusement to outright mockery. Admiral Kethavar, a tall reptilian creature with scales that gleamed under the bridge lights, pointed at the image floating before them. It showed a human ship, small, simple, and unremarkable compared to their fleet of 200 massive warships. "This is what the humans sent," laughed Commander Vexistar, his insect-like mandibles clicking with amusement. "The UES Hanul, it looks like a cargo hauler." The other commanders joined in the laughter. Captain Zordin, whose forearms gestured dramatically, spoke up. "My lord, surely this is some kind of joke. Our smallest escort ships are 3 times that size." Fleet Captain Day, a Korean officer who had defected to the hegemony years ago, studied the readings more carefully. His human heritage made him cautious, but even he couldn't hide his disappointment. "Admiral, the vessel appears to be lightly armed. Standard human technology from what I can see." Admiral Kethavar's yellow eyes gleamed with satisfaction. For months, the human colonies had been expanding into territories the hegemony claimed as their own. World after world, humans had ignored their warnings, their threats, their demands to stop. And now, finally, they had sent a response. This pathetic excuse for a warship. "Energy readings show some unusual signatures," reported the tactical officer, a blue-skinned humanoid whose voice carried concern. "The power core seems indifferent." Kethavar waved a dismissive claw. "Different how? More primitive human technology? Their fusion reactors are centuries behind our antimatter systems." "Sir, I'm not sure it's fusion-based. The energy pattern doesn't match anything in our databases." But the Admiral had already turned away, his attention focused on the tactical display showing their overwhelming fleet superiority. 200 warships against 1 small human vessel. Each of their dreadnoughts carried enough firepower to glass a planet. Their plasma cannons could punch through any known shield technology. Their void torpedoes could crack moon-sized asteroids in half. "This will be perfect training for our newest recruits," Kethavar announced, his voice carrying across the bridge. "They can practice their targeting systems on a real enemy vessel, though I doubt it will take more than 1 shot." The assembled officers laughed again, the sound echoing through the vast command center. Some were already placing bets on how quickly their weapons would reduce the human ship to space debris. Others discussed which junior officer should get the honor of the kill shot. Fleet Captain Day remained quiet, something nagging at the back of his mind. He had served alongside humans before his defection. They were clever, resourceful, and rarely did anything without a plan. Sending 1 ship against 200 seemed like suicide, unless they knew something the hegemony didn't. But looking at the overwhelming odds, at the massive alien fleet spread across space like an unstoppable wall of destruction, he pushed his doubts aside. No species in the galaxy was foolish enough to challenge the hegemony's might with such inferior numbers. The human ship continued its steady approach, seemingly unaware of the doom awaiting it. Captain Minho sat in the command chair of the UES Hanul, his dark eyes fixed on the view screen ahead. The Kepler 442 system stretched out before them. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the distant orange star or the habitable planet they'd come to protect. It was the wall of alien warships blocking their path. 200 contacts confirmed. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Jiwon from the sensor station. Her voice stayed steady, but Minho could hear the tension underneath. They're arranged in a standard blockade formation. The bridge of the Hanul was cramped compared to the massive alien vessels ahead. 47 people made up the entire crew, a mix that would seem strange to most military commanders. Dr. Nari worked at the science station, her fingers dancing over controls as she monitored energy readings. Chief Engineer Juan called up from the engine room through the comm system, his voice crackling with static. "Captain, the reactor's running smooth as silk down here," Juan reported. "All systems showing green across the board." Minho nodded, though. His chief engineer couldn't see it. The reactor Juan mentioned wasn't like anything humanity had built before. It hummed with a power that made the bulkheads vibrate slightly, a sound that had become as familiar as breathing to the crew over their long journey. "Open a channel to the lead ship," Minho ordered. The main screen flickered, showing the bridge of the alien flagship. Admiral Keithvar's reptilian face filled the view, his yellow eyes gleaming with what looked like amusement. Behind him, dozens of alien officers from different species watched with obvious entertainment. "This is Captain Minho of the United Earth ship Hanyul," he began, his voice calm and professional. "We're requesting safe passage through this system. Our destination is the fourth planet, where human colonists are waiting for supplies and protection." The sound that came from the alien ship wasn't quite laughter. It was worse. It was the sound of predators who'd found easy prey. Admiral Keithvar's mouth opened, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Protection," the Admiral hissed, his voice dripping with mockery. "Little human, you seem confused about who needs protection here." The other alien officers joined in, their various forms of laughter creating a chorus of derision. Some clicked mandibles, others made gurgling sounds, and a few produced high-pitched squeaks that hurt to hear. "We count 200 of our finest warships," Keithvar continued, gesturing with a clawed hand. "Each one capable of reducing your pathetic little toy to cosmic dust. And you speak of protection." Dr. Nari looked up from her console, catching Minho's eye. She gave him a small nod. Everything was ready on her end. Chief Wan's voice came through the comm again, quieter this time. "All systems nominal, Captain. The core's stable and ready for whatever comes next." Minho turned back to the screen, where the alien commander was now leaning forward, his expression shifting from amusement to something darker. "I'll give you one chance, human," Keithvar snarled. "Turn around and flee. Take your little ship and run back to whatever rock you crawled out from. Because in 60 seconds we're going to show the galaxy what happens to species that dare challenge the hegemony." The communication cut off, leaving the bridge of the Hanyul in silence. Around him, Minho's crew waited, their hands steady on E. Their controls, their faces calm despite the overwhelming odds. The countdown had begun. Across the hegemony fleet, 200 warships began their deadly dance. The massive vessels moved with surprising grace for their size, shifting from their blockade formation into something far more threatening. The smaller escort ships, each one still 3 times larger than the human vessel, broke away from the main group and began advancing. On the bridge of the Sovereign's Wrath, Admiral Keithvar watched the tactical display with satisfaction. His yellow eyes tracked the movement of his ships as they surrounded the lone human vessel, like wolves circling injured prey. "Communications officer," he barked, "I want every moment of this recorded. Full spectrum analysis, multiple angles. The galaxy needs to see what happens when inferior species challenge our authority." The blue-skinned communications officer's fingers flew over his console. "Recording active, Admiral. All fleet ships are transmitting their sensor data to our central archive." Behind the Admiral, the mood on the bridge had shifted from professional military operation to something closer to a sporting event. Officers from different species gathered around secondary displays, their voices rising in excitement. "I give the human ship 30 seconds once we open fire," clicked Commander Vextar, his insect-like head tilting as he studied the tactical readouts. Captain Zordin, the 4-armed alien, made a dismissive gesture. 30 seconds? You're being generous. Look at those shield readings. If they even have shields, 1 plasma burst and it's over. 10 credit says it takes 3 shots, offered another officer, a slug-like creature whose voice bubbled through a translator device. The betting spread quickly through the bridge crew. Some wagered on time, others on which weapon system would land the killing blow. A few even bet on whether the human ship would try to surrender before the first shot. Through it all, the UES Hanyul continued on its original course. It didn't turn away from the approaching escort ships. It didn't power up weapons that the alien sensors could detect. It didn't even raise its shields to full power. "Sir," reported the tactical officer, his voice uncertain, "the human vessel isn't responding to our battle formation. They're maintaining their original heading and speed." Admiral Keithvar's eyes narrowed. "Are they malfunctioning? Running some kind of bluff?" "Unknown, sir. Their energy readings remain unusual, but they're not powering weapons or defensive systems." On the human ship, Captain Minho stood calmly on his bridge, hands clasped behind his back. His crew worked quietly at their stations. No panic in their movements, no fear in their voices. Dr. Nari monitored her scientific instruments, while Chief Juan's steady reports continued to flow from the engine room. "Captain," Lieutenant Jiwon said softly, "the escort ships are closing to weapons range, 30,000 kilometers and closing." Minho nodded once, then activated the ship's communication system. His voice, when it came, was steady and clear, the voice of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Admiral Kethvar, this is Captain Minho. I'm speaking to you now, not as a request, but as a final warning." His words cut through the chatter on the alien bridge like a blade. "Order your ships to stand down and allow us passage. What you're about to witness is not something that can be undone." The laughter from the hegemony fleet was immediate and brutal. It echoed across communication channels, from ship to ship, species to species. The very idea that a single human vessel could threaten their mighty fleet struck them as the height of arrogance. "The human thinks he's threatening us," wheezed one officer between laughs. Admiral Kethvar's expression shifted to pure contempt. "Final warning? Little human, you're about to learn the difference between courage and stupidity." But something in Captain Minho's tone had made Fleet Captain Day pause. The former human's eyes studied the sensor readings one more time, that nagging feeling growing stronger. The escort ships continued their approach, weapons charging, ready to end this farce. The Hanul flew on, steady and calm, toward whatever destiny awaited. The hegemony escort ships moved closer, their massive hulls bristling with weapon ports that began to glow with deadly energy. Plasma arrays charged with a low hum that vibrated through space itself. The alien crews inside prepared for what they thought would be the easiest kill of their careers. 20,000 kilometers, 15,000, 10,000. On the bridge of the UES Hanul, Captain Minho watched the tactical display with the patience of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment for years. His crew remained at their stations, hands steady, breathing controlled. There was no panic here, only the quiet tension of professionals about to execute a plan that had taken humanity decades to prepare. "Captain," Lieutenant Jiwon reported, her voice barely above a whisper, "escort ships are at optimal firing range. Plasma arrays are fully charged." Dr. Nari looked up from her science station, her dark eyes meeting Minho's. She gave him the slightest nod. Everything was ready. "Chief." Engineer Juan's voice crackled through the comm system from deep in the ship's belly. "Core temperature is stable, Captain. All safety protocols are disengaged. We're ready for final sequence." Captain Minho took a slow breath, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. What happened in the next few moments would change everything. Not just for this battle, but for humanity's place in the galaxy forever. He thought about the colonists on the planet below, about Earth's children scattered across the stars, about every human who had ever been dismissed as weak or primitive by the galaxy's older civilizations. "All hands," he announced over the ships. "Internal communications. This is the captain. Brace for final sequence activation." Throughout the small ship, 47 people prepared themselves for what was coming. Scientists secured their equipment. Engineers made final adjustments to systems that had never been tested in combat. Even the few military personnel aboard felt their hearts racing, not from fear but from anticipation. Captain Minho's voice cut through the bridge's quiet tension like a sword. "Chief Juan, execute final sequence, now." Deep in the Hanuls engineering section, Juan's hands moved across controls that most humans had never seen. The device he activated had been 30 years in the making. The combined work of humanity's greatest minds, their most advanced physics, their deepest understanding of how reality itself could be bent and shaped. The change was immediate and terrifying. The HFY Hanul came to a complete stop in space, as if it had hit an invisible wall. Its modest hull began to glow with a blue-white light that seemed to come from within the metal itself. The glow spread slowly, pulsing like a heartbeat, growing brighter with each beat. On the alien flagship, alarm klaxons began to wail. "What in the void is happening?" Admiral Kethvar demanded, his yellow eyes fixed on the sensor displays that were going completely insane. The tactical officer's voice cracked with disbelief. "Sir, energy readings from the human vessel they're beyond anything in our databases. The numbers don't make sense." "Show me the readings." The holographic display flickered to life, showing energy levels that climbed higher and higher until they went off the scale entirely. The hegemony's most advanced sensors, designed to measure the output of entire star systems, couldn't keep up with what the small human ship was producing. "This is impossible," whispered the communications officer. "Nothing that size should generate that much power." Fleet Captain Day stepped forward, his human features pale with a growing realization. "Admiral, I recommend we pull back our escort ships immediately." For the first time since the engagement began, doubt crept into Admiral Kethvar's reptilian features. The confidence that had carried him through 1,000 battles started to crack as he watched readings that defied every law of physics he knew. The Hanul continued to glow brighter, its hull now shining like a small star against the darkness of space. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. Deep in the heart of the US Hanul, something that shouldn't exist was coming to life. The zero-point energy cascade projector, humanity's most closely guarded secret, hummed with power that made the ship's bulkheads vibrate like struck bells. Chief Engineer Juan watched his displays with a mixture of awe and terror as numbers climbed beyond anything he'd ever seen in testing. "Core activation at 60%, he reported, his voice steady, despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "Quantum field generators are online. Reality anchors are holding for now." The device represented 30 years of humanity's most advanced thinking. While other species had focused on bigger guns and stronger shields, human scientists had looked deeper into the very fabric of space and time itself. They had asked a simple question: what if you could break the rules of reality? The answer was terrifying. Throughout the ship, the crew felt something change in the air around them. It was like the moment before lightning strikes, when every hair stands on end and the world holds its breath. Dr. Nari's scientific instruments began registering readings that made no sense according to known physics. "Captain," she called out, her voice tight with concentration, "the quantum foam around our ship is becoming unstable. We're literally tearing holes in the foundation of space-time." On the bridge's main screen, they could see the Hanul's hull beginning to transform. Plates that had seemed solid and permanent started to retract with mechanical precision, sliding back to reveal something underneath that hurt to look at directly. A crystalline array emerged from the ship's core, growing outward like a deadly flower blooming in space. The crystals weren't made of any normal matter. They seemed to bend light around themselves, creating patterns that made the human eye struggle to focus. Where the light touched the crystals, reality itself seemed to ripple like water. "Captain." Minho gripped his command chair as the ship shuddered around them. "Chief Juan, status report. 80% activation, Captain. The cascade effect is building. We're approaching the point of no return." Across the void, the hegemony fleet was discovering that their overwhelming advantage meant nothing in the face of what they were witnessing. On ship after ship, sensor operators stared at displays that showed impossible readings. "Admiral," the tactical officer's voice had risen to nearly a shout, "local space around the human vessel is becoming unstable. Our sensors are detecting microfractures in reality itself." Admiral Kethvar's reptilian features twisted with confusion and growing fear. "That's impossible. No weapon can affect space-time directly." But the evidence was right in front of them. The nearest escort ships, those that had been moving in for the kill just moments before, suddenly found their engines sputtering. The reliable fusion reactors that had powered them across countless light years began to fail as the fundamental forces holding atoms together weakened around them. "Sir," came a panicked transmission from the escort ship. "Death's Edge. Our engines are going offline. Reactor containment is becoming unstable. Whatever that thing is doing, it's affecting our ship's basic systems." Another escort captain's voice crackled through the communications. "Admiral, this is Void Hunter. Our navigation computers are showing impossible readings. According to our instruments, we're somehow moving backward through time by 3 seconds. Every minute." Fleet Captain Day grabbed the Admiral's arm, his human knowledge finally clicking into place. "Sir, We need to retreat immediately. If humans have developed technology that can manipulate space-time directly, retreat? Kethvar snarled, but his voice carried less conviction than before. From one ship, the crystalline array on the Hanul grew brighter, its impossible geometry casting shadows that fell in directions that didn't exist. The smallest escort ships, those closest to the human vessel, began to drift helplessly as their engines failed, completely. Their crews reported that corridors were becoming longer or shorter than they should be, that time moved differently in different parts of their ships. On the Hanul, Chief Juan's voice carried a note of urgency. "Captain, we're at 95%. The cascade is almost ready. Once we cross the threshold, there's no stopping what comes next." Dr. Nari looked up from her instruments, her face pale but determined. "The quantum field is stable, Captain. We can fire when ready." Captain Minho nodded slowly, watching as reality itself bent around his ship. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment, the day they would show the galaxy that being underestimated was humanity's greatest weapon. The weapon was awake, and it hungered. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of the UES Hanul, his dark eyes reflecting the impossible light streaming from the crystalline array outside. Around him, his crew held their breath as the moment they had all trained for finally arrived. 30 years of human genius, decades of being dismissed and mocked by stronger alien civilizations, centuries of being treated as the galaxy's youngest and weakest species. It all came down to this single instant. The zero-point energy cascade projector reached full power, its readings climbing beyond anything that should be possible. Chief Engineer Juan's voice came through the comm one last time, steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to unleash. 100% activation achieved, Captain. The cascade is stable and ready for release." Dr. Nari looked up. From her science station, her instruments showing energy levels that broke every known law of physics. "All quantum anchors are holding, Captain. Reality distortion field is contained and focused." Outside the ship, space itself had begun to change. The crystalline array pulsed with light that seemed to come from another dimension entirely. Where that light touched the vacuum of space, tiny cracks appeared, not in any physical object but in the fundamental structure of existence itself. Captain Minho thought about every human colony that had been threatened, every diplomat who had been laughed out of alien council chambers, every time his species had been called primitive or weak. He thought about the children on the planet below, waiting for protection that had seemed impossible to provide. Now they would see what humanity was truly capable of. "Fire," he said quietly. The word was simple, calm, almost anticlimactic, but its effect was anything but small. The zero-point energy cascade projector released everything it had been building. Not just energy, but humanity's collective rage at being underestimated. The crystalline array flared brighter than a star. And then something indescribable began to expand outward from the Hanul. Space around the ship didn't just crack, it shattered like glass hit by a hammer. Reality itself broke apart in visible fractures that spread in all directions. But what came through those cracks wasn't darkness or light or any form of energy the universe had ever seen. It was nothing. Pure, absolute nothingness. Not the black emptiness of deep space, where matter was simply absent. Not the void between stars where at least the possibility of existence remained. This was the complete absence of everything. Matter, energy, time, space, even the mathematical. Concepts that allowed reality to function. The wave of unreality expanded outward at nearly the speed of light, moving toward the hegemony fleet like an unstoppable tide. Where it passed, existence simply ceased, not destroyed, not converted to energy, not even reduced to basic particles. Simply gone, as if it had never been. Admiral Kethvar watched. From his flagship, as the impossible wave approached his nearest escort ships, his reptilian mind, trained by centuries of military experience, finally understood the true scope of humanity's achievement. "All ships retreat," he screamed into his communications system. "Emergency jump, get out of here now." But it was already too late. The first escort ship, the Death's Edge, touched the edge of the expanding nothingness. For one brief moment, its crew had time to realize their terrible mistake. They had mocked humanity, dismissed them as weak, treated them as nothing more than an annoyance to be swept aside. Now they understood that humanity had been holding back all along. The ship didn't explode. It didn't burn or break apart or suffer any form of destruction that could be measured or understood. It simply stopped existing. One moment it was there, a massive warship with thousands of crew members, advanced weapons, and armor that could withstand planetary bombardment. The next moment there was nothing. Not even empty space where it had been, because the very concept of where it had been no longer applied. Ship after ship met the same fate as the wave continued to expand. The alien crews had just enough time to send panicked messages, to realize the magnitude of their error, to understand that they had challenged something far beyond their comprehension. Throughout the hegemony fleet, voices screamed across communication channels in dozens of different languages, all saying the same thing. The humans aren't weak. They never were weak. We made a terrible mistake. But the wave of nothingness cared nothing for their newfound understanding. It continued to expand, erasing ship after ship from existence with the cold efficiency of absolute zero. The galaxy was about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating humanity. Silence. The kind of silence that comes after thunder, when the world holds its breath and waits to see what remains. Father UES Hunnell drifted alone in space, where moments before 200 alien warships had filled the void with their threatening presence. Captain Minho stood on his bridge, staring at the main view screen that showed nothing. Not the twisted wreckage of destroyed ships, not the glowing debris fields that usually mark the site of a space battle, not even the fading energy signatures of exploded reactors. Just empty space, as clean and pristine as if no fleet had ever been there at all. The crystalline array that had emerged from his ship's hull was retracting now, sliding back into the Hunnell's armored shell with mechanical precision. The blue-white glow that had surrounded them was fading, leaving only the distant stars to light the void. "Weapon is powered down, Captain," Chief Engineer Juan reported from the engine room, his voice carrying exhaustion and awe in equal measure. "All systems returning to normal parameters. The zero-point projector is stable and secure." Dr. Nari looked up from her science station, her instruments now showing readings that made sense again. "The quantum field distortions are dissipating. Captain, local space-time is returning to standard configuration." But it was Communications Officer Jisoo who brought news of what was happening beyond their immediate area. Her dark eyes were wide as she monitored the flood of transmissions pouring in from across the galaxy. "Captain," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm picking up emergency broadcasts from hegemony worlds throughout this sector. Their deep space sensors detected the energy signature from our weapon." Minho nodded grimly. He had expected this. A weapon that could tear holes in reality itself would create ripples that could be detected across vast distances. Every major civilization in the galaxy would have felt the disturbance. "What are they saying?" he asked. Jisoo's fingers worked across her console, filtering through dozens of panicked transmissions. "Sir, the Hegemony High Command is trying to establish contact with their fleet. They're asking for status reports that will never come." The irony wasn't lost on anyone on the bridge. For centuries, the Hegemony had been one of the galaxy's dominant powers, their massive fleet striking fear into the hearts of smaller civilizations. They had built their reputation on overwhelming force, on the simple fact that no one could stand against their numbers. Now their entire battle fleet had been erased from existence by a single human ship. "There's more, Captain," Jisoo continued, her voice growing more amazed by the moment. "I'm intercepting communications from the Altarian Republic, the Vorthan Empire, even the Crystalline Collective. Word is spreading fast." Lieutenant G1 turned from her sensor station, her face pale but determined. "Sir, I'm not detecting any debris fields, any energy signatures, any trace that there was ever a battle here. It's like those ships just never existed." That was exactly what had happened, and everyone on the bridge knew it. The zero-point energy cascade projector hadn't destroyed the Hegemony fleet, it had simply removed them from reality entirely. There was no wreckage to salvage, no survivors to rescue. No evidence that Admiral Kethvar and his 200 warships had ever been anything more than a bad dream. Captain Minho walked to the front of the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at the empty space. In the distance, he could see the fourth planet of the Kepler 442 system, where human colonists waited for the supplies and protection they desperately needed. "Zhizu, what's the reaction from the other powers?" he asked. The communications officer's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Sir, the Altarian Republic has just issued an emergency recall of their third fleet. Apparently, they were moving to support the hegemony operation here." "And the others?" "The Vortan Empire is convening an emergency session of their ruling council, the first one in over 3 centuries, according to these transmissions. The Crystalline Collective is requesting immediate diplomatic contact with Earth and Captain..." She paused, a smile creeping across her face. "There are at least a dozen smaller civilizations that are formally requesting protection from humanity." Dr. Nari looked up from her station, her scientific mind still processing what they had accomplished. "Captain, do you realize what this means? For the first time in galactic history, humanity isn't asking for a seat at the table. Everyone else is asking us if they can sit down." Minho nodded slowly. For too long, humanity had been treated as the galaxy's children, young, weak, barely worth acknowledging. They had been dismissed, ignored, and pushed around by civilizations that saw them as nothing more than an annoyance. Today, that had changed forever. The galaxy now knew that humanity possessed weapons that could rewrite the fundamental laws of reality. They knew that the species they had mocked and underestimated had been quietly developing technologies that made their greatest achievements look like children's toys. Most importantly, they knew that humanity was no longer asking for respect. They were demanding it. In war rooms and council chambers across the galaxy, emergency meetings were being called for the first time in decades. The energy signature from humanity's weapon had been detected by every major civilization's deep space sensors, and the implications were terrifying. On Altaria Prime, Admiral Veltaran stared at the holographic display showing the complete disappearance of the hegemony's second battle fleet. His blue-skinned features had gone pale as he processed what his sensors were telling him. "Confirm those readings," he ordered his tactical officer, his voice tight with disbelief. "Confirmed, Admiral. 200 hegemony warships have simply vanished. No debris, no energy residue, no distress signals. They're just gone." Veltaran felt cold fear creep up his spine. The Altarian Republic had been moving their third fleet to support the hegemony operation, confident that the humans would be crushed within hours. Their intelligence reports had described humanity as a primitive species with outdated technology and laughably small ships. Those reports were clearly catastrophically wrong. "Issue immediate recall orders to all fleet elements," he commanded. "Emergency jump back to Altarian space. Cancel the support operation." "Sir, what reason should I give the fleet commanders?" Veltaran looked at the empty space where an entire battle fleet had existed just minutes before. "Tell them the humans aren't what we thought they were. Halfway across the galaxy, in the crystal spires of the Vorthan Empire's capital world, something unprecedented was happening. The ancient council, which hadn't met in emergency session for over 300 years, was being summoned for the first time since the Great Plague Wars. Councillor Thexandra, whose crystalline body had been alive for over 2 millennia, felt vibrations of shock through her structure as she received the sensor data. The Vorthan Empire had ruled vast sectors of space when humanity was still learning to make fire. They had seen the rise and fall of 100 civilizations, had witnessed supernovas and the birth of new species, but they had never seen anything like this. "The quantum disturbance readings are impossible," she transmitted to her fellow councillors through harmonic resonance. "No known technology can manipulate space-time on this scale." Elder Vorthak, oldest of their kind, pulsed with ancient wisdom and newfound concern. "Perhaps it is time we reconsidered our policies regarding younger species. If the humans possess such capabilities, then we have gravely underestimated them." Thexandra completed the thought. "Alert our diplomatic corps. We must establish formal contact with Earth immediately." On dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. The hegemony's vassal states, who had relied on their protection for centuries, suddenly found themselves defenseless and desperate. The Zeltarian Confederacy, which had refused to even acknowledge human diplomatic messages for decades, was now frantically trying to establish communication with Earth. Prime Minister Kolvex of the Confederacy paced his office as his aides worked frantically at their communication arrays. His species had always prided themselves on their technological superiority, looking down on humanity as primitive mammals barely worth noticing. "Have we established contact with the human homeworld yet?" he demanded. "Not yet, sir. Our previous policy was to block all human diplomatic channels. We're having difficulty reopening them." Kolvex's four eyes flashed with frustration and growing panic. "Then unblock them. All of them. Send a priority diplomatic message to Earth requesting immediate talks, and draft a formal apology for our previous oversights." The irony wasn't lost on his staff. The same species they had dismissed as backward and weak now held technology that could erase entire fleets from existence. In the Outer Rim territories, smaller civilizations that had never dared to interact with the galaxy's major powers were also scrambling to contact humanity. The Peaceful Traders Alliance, a collection of merchant species that had always lived in fear of stronger military powers, saw an opportunity they had never imagined. "Send an offer to the humans," ordered trade speaker Nim-Ara, her tentacles weaving patterns of excitement. "Full trading privileges, exclusive resource agreements, whatever they want. If they can make the hegemony disappear, they can protect us from anyone." Similar requests were flooding toward Earth from across the galaxy. Species that had never acknowledged human existence were now begging for protection, for trade agreements, for any kind of formal relationship with the civilization they had ignored for so long. On remote monitoring stations throughout space, intelligence officers were frantically rewriting their assessments of human capabilities. Files marked primitive species were being reclassified as extreme threat level, faster than bureaucrats could process the changes. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from the hegemony's own capital world. Without their primary battle fleet, without Admiral Kethvar and his 200 warships, the mighty empire that had dominated entire sectors suddenly looked vulnerable. In the space of one moment, one impossible weapon, the entire balance of galactic power had shifted. Humanity was no longer the galaxy's youngest child. They had become its most feared predator. 6 months after the Kepler 442 incident, the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the massive chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, hums, whistles, and electronic translations. But today, all attention focused on one figure standing at the central podium. Captain Minho, now wearing the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, looked out at an audience that would have been unimaginable just months ago. These were the same species that had ignored human requests for membership, dismissed their technological achievements, and treated them like children playing at civilization. Now they stared at him with a mixture of fear, respect, and desperate curiosity. The Altarian representative, Admiral Veltaran himself, sat in the front row where once he would never have acknowledged a human presence. Beside him, the crystalline form of Councillor Thexandra pulsed with barely contained anxiety. Even the proud Zeltarian delegation, who had refused to share the same orbital space as human ships, now hung on every word. "Honored representatives," Minho began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, "I stand before you today as Earth's first official representative to this council. I want to thank you for finally opening your doors to humanity." The irony in his tone wasn't lost on anyone present. For decades, human diplomats had requested membership in the Galactic Council, only to be told they weren't advanced enough, weren't worthy of consideration. "Many of you have questions about what happened at Kepler 442, Minho continued. "You've seen our sensor data, studied the energy readings, tried to understand how one small human ship could eliminate an entire hegemony battle fleet." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The fate of Admiral Kethvar's fleet had become legendary across the galaxy. 200 of the most advanced warships ever built, simply erased from existence. I want to clear up some misconceptions, Minho said, walking slowly around the podium. The UES Hanul was not a warship. It was a research vessel testing new theories about space-time manipulation and quantum field dynamics. The silence that followed was deafening. If a research ship could do what the Hanul had done, what could humanity's actual military vessels accomplish? You see, Minho continued, his calm voice carrying a note that made several representatives shift uncomfortably. Humanity has spent the last 50 years being underestimated. While you dismissed us as primitive, we were developing technologies that rewrite the fundamental laws of physics. While you laughed at our small ships, we were learning to manipulate reality itself. Councillor Thexandra's crystalline form pulsed with urgent light patterns. Captain Minho, if I may ask, how many ships like the Hanul does humanity possess? Minho smiled, the expression somehow more terrifying than any threat. The Hanul was our first-generation prototype. We currently operate a fleet of over 3,000 vessels, most of which make the zero-point energy cascade projector look like a child's toy. The statement hit the assembly like a physical blow. 3,000 ships, each potentially capable of erasing entire fleets from existence. Our newest vessels, Minho continued conversationally, don't just manipulate local space-time. They can rewrite the quantum foundations of matter itself, alter the fundamental constants that hold atoms together, even adjust the flow of time in targeted areas. Prime Minister Kolvex of the Zeltarian Confederacy stood shakily, his four eyes wide, with terror. Captain Minho, surely you don't intend to use such weapons aggressively? That depends entirely on you, Minho replied simply. Humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We never did. All we ever wanted was to be treated as equals, to have our voices heard, to protect our colonies and our people. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. For too long, this galaxy has been ruled by those who believed that bigger guns and larger fleets determined who deserved respect. You've built your civilizations on the idea that might makes right, that the strong can do whatever they want. To the weak. Minho's voice grew harder, carrying the weight of centuries of human frustration. Well, now you know who's really strong. The question is, what kind of galaxy do you want to build going forward? Around the chamber, representatives who had once sneered at human diplomatic requests now looked at him with the desperate attention of students before a master. The age when humanity begged for scraps from the galactic table was over. The age of human ascendancy had begun. We're willing to work with anyone who treats us as equals, Minho concluded. As for those who don't, he shrugged, the gesture somehow containing more menace than any weapon. Well, just ask the hegemony how that worked out for them. The silence that followed said everything about how completely the galaxy had changed. Humanity was no longer asking for respect. They were simply taking it.